In a year when the King of France, who was probably grumpy all the time anywhere, he's grumpy again. He kept sending things across to Asia on a route that we know as the Silk Road. Maybe one of the bigger misnomers in history. It wasn't silky at all. No, they actually lost a lot of people along the way, and he was frustrated. He said, I got to find a better way to make trade with China. Well, let's send somebody who's crazy enough to sail across the ocean without a map and see if they can find a water route to Asia. This guy's name ended up being Giovanni Verrazzano. You might remember him from 6th grade history. He had about a paragraph of that year. Pretty good time of year to be sailing these waters, let me tell you. Nice and chill, and he wrote about that in his logbook until he reached a point that begins about 23 miles down this river. Yeah, that's the Atlantic Ocean, but it's also where a very treacherous area of the sea extends 30 miles out there. Let's call it the Frying Pan Shoals. And Verrazzano, he didn't know that. So what he ended up naming this as he tried to get around this dangerous area was Cape Terror. How's that for a movie name? Probably would have done better. Turns out it didn't test great with the marketing department. They took it down to Cape Fear in the translation from Latin and ended up calling it Cape Fair actually for a little while before settling on Cape Fear once again. Well, Verrazzano, yeah, he went off and did his thing. I don't think he ever got to China. But after that, about 100 years later, we had the British coming upriver. And they didn't really think about much except one thing, and that was cutting down trees, specifically longleaf pine trees that grow so prominently around the Carolina area. They made it up. And so those guys did that with naval superiority with a lot of the trees that they got out of here. And you may know that the Tar Heels designation for the state people who live here is from that time. The tar that would come out of those trees and everything like that they used to build ships. Well, the irony of it all, British are out of here by the early 1800s. They're not dominating this spot anymore. And old Wilmington felt pretty good about itself. It was the busiest port in the whole United States in the early 1800s. On any given day, there might be 90 ships lining this thing. It looked more like a harbor than it did a river. And they all had to stop at the site of our big white courthouse right here, or stone courthouse. Now, if you ever walk by the north entrance on the riverside and look at the door header above the door, engraved there it still says United States Customs House. Each and every ship had to stop there on the way in. They all had to stop there on the way out. And Market Street, which lies directly adjacent to it, got its name because then people would go sell that stuff they just checked in. Up on the 50s, railroads out of here. Shipbuilding had moved offshore. It got really run down. In fact, the federal government designated this area as a Superfund site. It means it's real polluted. We got to clean this up. So they did that. And now these buildings here are the beneficiaries of that new time. And the main one I like to talk about is this brick building right here on the right. That's Cape Fear Community College. Now they won kind of the real estate lottery as far as institutions of higher learning go. You can go there and get a great education without spending $1 million. And you can get a great nursing degree. They have one of the best marine technology programs in the country. They also have one of only 12 wooden boat building degrees in the whole United States out of this little school right here. And those marine tech students, they get to use this big boat right here. The Cape Hatteras, formerly of Duke University. This 138-foot piece of steel right here, it's a pretty strong boat. And the RV that's on the front of the name up here does not stand for recreational vehicle, I assure you. Once you get inside of it, it does stand for research vessel is the designation of this boat right here. And students go out to sea and learn how to work alongside marine biologists and geologists. They also learn to do sustainable commercial fishing, which is so important these days. And also, they'll do some contract work for the United States Navy. Believe it or not, this is a spotter boat for those guys. When they're out there testing weapons, these guys are looking for whales that may be in the area to be like, hey, hold up on the red button. We got some whales right here. We don't want to be blowing their ears out. So that's just some of the stuff that goes on. Now, you see there's a river over there with hot water. Those cannons come out of that plant material. Same thing here. Trees and leaves fall in the river, they break down, and they give it this brown tint. So in the old days, sailors actually used to fill up giant barrels of water to drink the water from this river. And they were incorrect in assuming that there was some nutritional value in that gritty taste. And they somehow, they were built different back then. Maybe they just liked that muddy water. You can see this fireboat right here. Thankfully, they don't get a lot of business, but when they do test that boat out, those little nozzles right there can shoot huge waterfalls of water all the way across the whole river. It's a really powerful little boat. And it's got jet drives like you'd see on a jet ski, but a lot bigger, so it can get into real shallow spaces. So, one thing about this river I'll touch on is how deep it is. This river was only 10 feet deep in its original state. Now, over the last 120, 130 years or so, they've been dredging it or digging it out deeper and deeper, and that's because the ships that come into our ports need more and more water because they're so big. So now we went from 10 feet all the way to 47 feet deep, all the way to the ocean, certified. Now a container vessel coming into the state port might need 40 feet of water just to float. But more importantly, it changed the river forever. It made it so this river is actually below sea level. And the ocean comes up here twice a day and gives us an actual tide of 4.5 to 5.5 feet on each cycle, and makes us the only river in the state of North Carolina that actually changes directions of flow, and it just did it last hour. So now we are in an ebbing tide. It's going that way. We're draining the basin. Now, another unique thing about this area is how we have water coming down. So you got 110 miles over here. You're going to go for a quarter turn. 110 miles up here to Mount Olive and 120 on the other side, and it actually is a giant funnel for the whole state. What I'm telling you is 1 out of every 6 raindrops that hits North Carolina ends up in the water of this river. So it's a huge watershed, and with the ocean lot going on, it is salty, it's brackish. So keep your eyes peeled. You might see a dolphin, you might see a sea turtle. During the crab season, we have blue crab traps littering this river, and over 90% of our catch is actually exported, not to another country, but to the state of Maryland, believe it or not. They're going to pour some Old Bay on it and call it theirs. So that's one thing that's going on there. Now up in front of us, guys, is none other. It's looking good here, guys. We're going up the main branch of the Cape Fear. This extends 120 miles up towards Raleigh, and this used to be like a big highway. Before we had freeways in the United States, our great waterways that we were blessed with is how we grew as such a great country so well. In those times, we could use these waterways. Well, this water that we're floating on right now actually is not natural. This was completely constructed, and that is because this river meandered, I should say, or turned so tightly in the old days that barges and tugboats could barely get around it. So they ended up driving this straight line for about 10 miles through here, and this is what we got now. It's about 35 feet deep. Here's the funny part. Right about when they got this thing opened up and ready to go, I guess it was Eisenhower signed the Interstate Act, and they ended up building all these freeways. Everything went on to 18 wheels, and this turned into a ghost town. In fact, you could be out here today on the July 4th or Memorial Day when you may expect to see many boats on the water and see none. It's just a fantastic thing about Wilmington is you can go 5 minutes in any direction on the water and find yourself in a real quiet spot. It's pretty cool. All right, guys. Well, over to the right-hand side, people are like, what's going on there? I'm like, I don't know. Have you ever had a neighbor who didn't like to clean up their yard? That's that guy. And then over here on the left, though, we have the second largest inland island in the whole United States. The biggest one's on the Hudson River, in case you were wondering. But this is 7 miles long and 3 miles wide, and it was named Eagles Island. So Eagles Island was named after a person, not a bird. It was named after Dr. Richard Eagles, who received this land as a gift from the King of England at a time when the king really needed some friends. What's a better way to do it than with the gift of land? And so that's what he did. Here you go, buddy. And at the time when the primary crop in this part of North Carolina, and more so in the South Carolina, was rice. Well, this guy decided, I'm going to start a rice plantation. Well, that couldn't be.
Thought that a stick looked like an alligator, but it was actually just a really sophisticated stick.
There you go. That's a testament to how they've evolved to look just like those things, so they can sneak up on stuff. Thanks, bud. So yeah, those guys are unique. They're the only American alligators that have made an adaptation to living in a salty environment. Now, we are coming into their mating season. That will continue until June, and they'll be pretty active out here. In fact, just on last Thursday, I got to see one attack something for the first time ever. I saw an alligator attack a snapping turtle, a big one. And it was like the whole Nat Geo look, things splashing in the water, all that. And he came up out of the water like a happy golden retriever with a big old turtle in his mouth. And just happily swam off to have some lunch. So the other thing we should keep our eyes for out here is birds. Specifically, let's look for raptors. Raptors are birds that hunt for their food. We have eagles and hawks and owls and harriers, all that stuff around here. But we also have osprey. That's a bird otherwise known as a sea hawk. An example of their nest is on that big electrical tower over there. You may not realize it, but the spacing between those electrical cables is made as wide as it is to make sure that birds can't spread their wings and arc off of it. It's real narrow, it's real shallow. This is the original course of the river and why they had to build what we're floating on right now. It's real sketchy. In fact, it goes around in the shape of a horseshoe and it exits just about 400 yards ahead. real tight. In fact, they used to have to employ people with long poles to like push barges and tugs up off the bank as they tried to make it around the corner. That was something you could do out of high school, I guess, back then. And then